Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blade shattered against his throat. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The obsidian dagger was forged in the fires of the nether, guaranteed to slice through dragon scale, let alone the pale, exposed skin of a human neck. But as the shards of black glass rained down onto the marble floor, chiming like mocking laughter, Lucian realized with a sickening lurch in his gut that he hadn't walked into an assassination. He had walked into an execution. "Did you honestly think," a voice purred, smooth as velvet dragged over gravel, "that a cheap trinket from the shadow market could pierce a skin warded by the blood of 7 kings?" Lucian scrambled backward, his boots skidding on the polished floor of the penthouse, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was expansive, a glass-walled cage overlooking the neon-soaked sprawl of Neoviridia, but right now, it felt like a coffin. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling window, silhouetted against the bleeding lights of the city, was Julian Blackwood, the High Sorcerer, the mob boss of the Arcane District, the monster Lucian had sworn to kill. Julian didn't even turn around. He simply swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, his posture radiating a terrifying, casual arrogance. "I'm disappointed, little thief. I left the balcony unlocked. I dismissed my guards. I practically laid out a red carpet for you. And this is the best you can do." "You knew." Lucian spat, scrambling to his feet, his hands sparking with pathetic, fizzling embers of his own depleted magic. "You set me up." Julian turned then. He was devastatingly handsome, in the way a hurricane is beautiful before it tears a city apart. Sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of frozen emeralds, and a mouth curved into a smirk that promised ruin. He took a slow sip of his drink. "I own the man who hired you, Lucian," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating in Lucian's chest. "Why would I let a rogue spellblade like you get within breathing distance?" "Because I didn't want you dead. I wanted you here." This was the contradiction that had plagued Lucian since he took the contract. Why would a man as paranoid and powerful as Blackwood leave a gap in his defenses? The answer was simple, and it terrified him. It wasn't a gap. It was a snare. "Go to hell," Lucian snarled, pulling a secondary blade from his boot. Julian sighed, setting his glass down. "I own that place too. Now kneel." The command wasn't spoken. It was slammed into the air with the weight of a physical blow. The gravity in the room seemed to increase tenfold. Lucian's knees buckled. He fought it, his muscles screaming, his pride burning hotter than his magic, but the pressure was absolute. With a humiliated cry, he crashed to his knees, the knife clattering from his grip. Julian walked over, the click of his dress, shoes echoing like gunshots. He stopped in front of Lucian, reached down, and gripped Lucian's chin, forcing him to look up. "You hate me," Julian observed, searching Lucian's eyes. "Good. Hate is useful. Hate is fuel. Love makes you sloppy. But hate keeps you alive. I will kill you," Lucian whispered, trembling not from fear, but from the sheer force of the magical aura crushing him. "Perhaps one day," Julian murmured, his thumb brushing over Lucian's lower lip, a gesture shockingly intimate for a death threat. "But until then, you belong to me. The debt your father owed my family wasn't cleared by his death, Lucian. It passed to you. And since you cannot pay in gold, you will pay in blood." The first month was a blur of humiliation and exhaustion. Lucian wasn't thrown into a dungeon. That would have been too simple. Instead, he was installed in the Blackwood estate as Julian's personal detail. A glorified bodyguard. A servant with a lethal skill set. Julian had placed a hayas, a magical binding contract, branded directly onto Lucian's collarbone. It didn't control his mind, but it prevented him from harming Julian and forced him to obey direct commands. It was an itch under his skin, a constant reminder of his failure. The power dynamic was suffocating. Julian was the sun, and everyone else was merely orbiting debris. He was demanding, meticulous, and cruel in his precision. He made Lucian stand guard for hours while he conducted business meetings with warlocks and senators. He made Lucian pour his wine, test his food for poison, and endure the sneers of the elite who recognized him as the fallen son of the disgraced Vane family. But what Lucian hated most wasn't the servitude. It was the way Julian looked at him. It wasn't with contempt. It was with a calculating curiosity. One rainy Tuesday, after a particularly grueling negotiation with a rival werewolf clan, Julian found Lucian in the training dojo. Lucian was taking his frustration out on a training dummy, his movements a blur of sweat and steel. He didn't hear Julian enter until the man spoke. "Your form is sloppy. You're fighting with anger, not intent." Lucian froze, panting, sweat dripping from his nose. He didn't turn. "I'm imagining it's you. The anger helps." "Does it?" Suddenly, Julian was there. He moved faster than a human should, faster even than a sorcerer should. He grabbed Lucian's wrist, twisting it. Lucian reacted on instinct, spinning to deliver a kick, but Julian blocked it with a forearm that felt like iron. In seconds, Lucian was pinned against the wall, Julian's body pressed flush against his. The heat radiating from the older man was intoxicating, smelling of sandalwood and ozone. "You have raw power, Lucian," Julian whispered against his ear, sending a shiver down Lucian's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "But you lack discipline. You fight like a brawler. I need a weapon." "I am not your weapon," Lucian hissed, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The proximity was overwhelming. He could see the golden flecks in Julian's green eyes, the pores of his skin, the faint scar running through his left eyebrow. "You are whatever I say you are," Julian countered, his voice dropping to a husky growl. He shifted his hips, and Lucian gasped, a flush rising to his cheeks. The friction was undeniable. "And right now, you are trembling, because I want to rip your throat out." Julian smirked, pulling back just enough to look Lucian in the eye. "Is that really what you want to do to my throat? Because your pulse suggests otherwise." He released Lucian abruptly, leaving him cold and staggering against the wall. "Clean yourself up," Julian ordered, walking to the door without looking back. "We have a gala tonight. Wear the black suit. And Lucian, try not to look so eager to murder the guests. It's bad for business." This slow burn of their relationship was not a gentle warming. It was a forest fire waiting for a spark. The gala was a masquerade held at the Obsidian Palace, neutral ground for the warring magical factions. The air was thick with tension and perfume. Lucian stood by a marble pillar, uncomfortable in the tailored silk suit Julian had forced upon him. He scanned the crowd, his hand hovering near the concealed blade in his jacket. Julian was the center of attention, as always. He moved through the crowd like a shark through water, charming senators and threatening rivals with the same pleasant smile. Lucian watched him. He told himself he was watching for threats, but his eyes lingered on the way the chandelier light caught Julian's dark hair, the way his broad shoulders filled out his tuxedo. He hated him. He hated him so much it felt like a physical ache. "He's beautiful, isn't he?" Lucian stiffened. A woman had sidled up to him. She was draped in red velvet, her mask a fox's visage. "He's a tyrant," Lucian replied curtly. "Tyrants often are beautiful," the woman mused. "That's how they get away with it. I'm Alara. I used to be in your position." Lucian turned to her, eyes narrowing. "His bodyguard? His plaything," she corrected, her voice laced with bitterness. "Julian Blackwood doesn't have partners. He has possessions. Don't let him break you, boy. He'll use you until you're dull, and then he'll discard you." The word stung, more than Lucian wanted to admit. He looked back at Julian, who was currently laughing at something an elven ambassador had said. For a moment, the mask of the cold mob boss slipped, and Lucian saw a genuine smile. It transformed his face. Then, the windows exploded. Glass shattered inward as figures rappelled from the skylights. Assassins dressed in the tactical gear of the Iron Order, a fanatical anti-magic group. "Secure the High Sorcerer," someone screamed. Chaos erupted. Spells flew across the room. Fireballs, shards of ice, bolts of kinetic energy. The civilians screamed and trampled each other. Lucian didn't think. The haze burned on his skin, a commanding order to protect, but he was moving before the magic even registered. He sprinted toward Julian. Julian was already fighting. He wielded magic like a maestro, flicking his wrists to send shockwaves that shattered the bones of his attackers. But there were too many of them. They were using dampening grenades, technology designed to suppress magic. A sniper on the balcony took aim. Julian was distracted by two swordsmen. "Julian!" Lucian screamed. He dove. The bullet was meant for Julian's heart. It caught Lucian in the shoulder. The impact spun him around. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded in his upper body. He hit the floor, sliding across the polished marble. The world went mute. He could see Julian turn. He saw the expression on the High Sorcerer's face change from combat focus to sheer, unadulterated horror. Lucian. The name was a roar that shook the foundations of the palace. Julian unleashed hell. He didn't just cast spells. He tore the weave of reality. Shadows erupted from his body, turning into tangible tendrils that skewered the assassins. It was a massacre. Within seconds, the threat was neutralized, the room silent save for the whimpering of the survivors. Julian was at Lucian's side instantly, dropping to his knees in the blood and glass, ruining his immaculate suit. "You idiot," Julian hissed, his hands hovering over the wound. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Why did you do that?" "The contract," Lucian gasped, blood bubbling past his lips. "The Hayes. To hell with the Hayes," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "I never ordered you to take a bullet. I ordered you to stay alive." He placed his hands on the wound. Green light flared, healing magic. It was complex, draining work. Julian was pouring his own life force into Lucian, knitting flesh and bone back together. "Stop," Lucian whispered, seeing the strain on Julian's face. "You'll drain yourself. Enemies. Still here. Let them come," Julian growled, his eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. "I will burn this entire city to ash before I let you die on this floor." In that moment, through the haze of pain, Lucian realized two things. First, Alara was wrong. Julian didn't look at him like a possession. He looked at him like he was the only thing in the world that mattered. Second, Lucian didn't want to kill him anymore. Recovery was slow. They retreated to a safe house in the mountains, a modernist fortress of concrete and glass hidden by heavy enchantments. The dynamic had shifted. The collars were gone, metaphorically. Julian had dissolved the Hayes the moment they arrived, freeing Lucian from the magical servitude. "You're free," Julian had said, standing by the fireplace, refusing to look at Lucian. "The debt is paid. You took a bullet. We're square. Go." But Lucian didn't go. He stayed, ostensibly to heal, but in reality, because the silence between them had changed. It was no longer hostile. It was heavy with unspoken words. One evening, a week later, Lucian found Julian on the terrace, watching the snow fall. "Why haven't you left?" Julian asked, his breath misting in the cold air. "I left the keys to the rover on the counter. You have money in the safe." Lucian walked over, standing next to him. "Why did you save me? You could have let me die and hired another guard." Julian gripped the railing, his knuckles white. "Do you really need me to say it?" "Yes." Julian turned to him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that made him look younger, human. "Because I have spent 100 years building an empire, Lucian. I have everything. Money, power, fear. And I have never been more bored. Or more lonely." He took a step closer. "And then you crashed into my office with a cheap knife and eyes full of fire. You didn't fear me. You hated me. It was the most honest thing anyone has ever given me. And now," Lucian asked, his voice barely a whisper, "I don't hate you anymore." "I know," Julian said softly. "That scares me more than the knife did." He reached out, his hand hesitating before cupping Lucian's cheek. His touch was gentle, reverent. "If you stay, Lucian, there is no going back. My world is blood and darkness. I am not a good man." "I know," Lucian replied, leaning into the touch. "I'm not looking for a hero. I'm looking for you." Julian let out a ragged breath, like a man surfacing from drowning. He closed the distance. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was weeks of pin-up rage, fear, and desire exploding all at once. Julian kissed him like he was starving, devouring him, and Lucian met him with equal force. He grabbed Julian's lapels, pulling him closer, anchoring himself against the storm. It was messy and desperate and perfect. It was the taste of whiskey and winter air. It was the feeling of coming home to a place you didn't know you belonged. But peace is a luxury in their world, and luxuries are expensive. The Iron Order hadn't given up. They had tracked the magical signature of Julian's healing spell. The alarm shattered the moment. Red lights bathed the safe house. "They're here," Julian said, pulling away, the mask of the High Sorcerer sliding back into place. But before he turned, he pressed a quick, fierce kiss to Lucian's forehead. Stay here. The safe room is in the basement. No, Lucian said, grabbing his weapon from the table. Lucian, please. I'm not your servant, remember? Lucian smirked, a sharp, dangerous expression that mirrored Julian's own. I'm your partner, and nobody touches what's mine. Julian stared at him for a second, stunned. Then, a dark, delighted grin spread across his face. Yours. Mine, Lucian confirmed. Very well, Julian said, summoning balls of emerald fire into his hands. Then let's go remind them why the name Blackwood is feared. The battle was brutal. The snow outside the safe house was stained crimson and scorched black. But they fought in perfect synchronization. Where Julian was raw power, a hammer of magical force, Lucian was the scalpel, quick and precise. They moved back to back, covering each other's blind spots. It was a dance of death, violent and beautiful. When the last of the Order's soldiers fell, silence returned to the mountain. Lucian stood panting, wiping blood from his cheek. He looked at Julian. The High Sorcerer was disheveled, bruised, and terrifying. And he was looking at Lucian with absolute devotion. Julian walked over, stepping over the bodies of their enemies without a glance. He took Lucian's face in his hands, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of victory and iron. I love you, Julian whispered against his lips. Lucian froze. The words hung in the cold air, heavier than any spell. You talk too much, Lucian murmured, pulling him back in. Tell me again. And that is how the stray dog tamed the Sorcerer King. If you enjoyed seeing Julian lose his composure for the sake of love, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a man who enslaved you if he burned the world down to save your life? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,